Welcome to the Soul Surgery podcast. My name is Nikki Clinch and I am your host. I am a maturation facilitator, teacher and coach, integrative holistic health counselor, breathwork facilitator, and author. I am the founder of the Academy of Maturation Coaching, the Alchemy of Being, where I train as many people as I can to become powerful spaces for human beings to come home to their authentic truth. Maturation is a powerful evolutionary process of dissolving trauma, breaking free of stuck patterns, and growing and healing at the taproot. Growing out of who we thought we were from the stories led by our past conditioning in order to grow and evolve into who we were born to be. In this podcast, I will be sharing many different things with you, opening up the doorways to my coaching sessions where you can witness with your own eyes how trauma contaminates our reality and how we can dissolve it, heal it at the root, and rewrite the story of our lives, reclaiming our power and reminding each one of us that who we are is wholeness. I will be interviewing some of the world's most prominent teachers in spirituality, healing, transformation, and human evolvement, and sharing with you my own teachings and learnings along the way. And above all, sharing with you my heart. The purpose of this podcast is to remind each one of you who you really are, to open up the doorway to a new possibility, to a new paradigm, to healing, health, transformation, and our evolvement as individuals and a species. So I hope you enjoy today's episode. One thing that you can do for me, if you find this podcast useful and if you love it, please do subscribe. And if you feel called to, leave a review, because reviews really matter. They help to spread the word and help to spread this podcast to as many people as we can. And lastly, if you have any big aha moments, any shifts, any insights in any of these episodes, please do share it with me. Share with me which episode it was, where in the episode it happened, and how it has impacted you and your life. So without further ado, let's get going. I hope you enjoy today's episode on the Soul Surgery podcast. So here we are in this episode with my husband. Everybody, this is my husband, Kevin. Kevin, say hello.
Hello. Hi.
So this is a new episode. This is a new way of recording something for Soul Surgery, where this is the first time that we have sat together and recorded. I'm nervous. Are you nervous?
Yeah, a little.
Okay. Let's take a nice deep breath.
Let's be nervous together.
So we are going to speak about the opportunity of when there's crisis in relationship, and in particular long-term relationship, in particular marriage, or what can be related to as marriage. So a relationship that has a long-term commitment to it. And how we can turn a crisis into an opportunity, into a massive opportunity for transformation and growth, which is, of course, what happened for us. And this is the first time that we're publicly speaking about it, even though I write about it in my book, which is going to be coming out and is available for pre-sales, my book, Surrender. But we wanted to share each other and ourselves with you, I guess, because you just don't hear this sort of thing enough, do you, around relationship?
Yeah, and I think particularly with what's been going on in the world, with so much pressure on people in relationship because of lockdown and COVID and all that's been going on, it's been intensified. It's almost been like a crash course in intense, isolated relationship.
Yeah, that's really true, actually. I would imagine. I mean, I heard some kind of statistic that the divorce rates are higher than ever before since COVID, which makes sense, right? If we're thrown into a house together and we haven't got our distractions and the things that we like to do that define our individual lives. Oof. I mean, relationship is already difficult. Long-term relationships is already difficult enough in themselves. To then be faced with each other with no distractions and nowhere to hide it reveals a lot of what is there. So let's talk about us. Why don't we begin with, a little bit about us? I always get this wrong. We've been together, 10 years this year.
Yeah, goodness. Okay.
Is this your longest relationship?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, mine too. By far my longest relationship. For me, I was always a two-year person. Once it hit the 2-year mark, I'd be out of there. How about you? What was your longest before
I think I had a couple
this?
of four or fives. I think that was the transition point for me.
Okay,
yeah.
4 or 5s. Well, my God, here we are. We're at 10 years. We've been married this will be our 6th year of marriage. Is that right? Or is it 7?
I need to fact check that.
Somewhere between 6 and 7. Somewhere between 6 and 7. And we hit a massive crisis in 2019. So why don't we begin by talking about that? Let's talk about before I went to Peru. So it was around sort of April, May 2019. When you remember that time, not so much specifically about, what was actually happening in our lives, but the challenge that we were in. What do you remember about that?
Well, I think we were going through a very challenging process, both personally and as a couple. So, you were in the process of developing what is now your work, I think. And I was at the same time struggling with my work and falling out of love with my work simultaneously as you were falling in love with yours. And personally, we were also going through challenges with, maintaining the household and all the things, the challenges of a relationship,
Oh, yes, I remember.
Yeah.
You came out of, you had a 9-to-5 job. It had been your career for a long time. And you came out of that. Gosh, I forgot this. You came out of that. I was 8 months pregnant with Callum. And you came out of that work and you said to me, I want to follow my heart and do what I really love. I remember you saying that. Do you remember that?
Well, I do, but I also know that I was going through a very difficult time with that. I was actually having health problems, which I think were directly related to not living in alignment or doing things which really supported me. I was under a great deal of stress and anxiety. I really realized that the work I was doing just wasn't really for me.
Yes.
And was ending up in really stressful situations. I know a procession of jobs which would come to an end, wouldn't work out. There was bullying going on, different things happening. And
yes.
And it was all pointing to something for me, but it wasn't clear what direction I was going to be taking from there.
It was like life was just saying, now it's time for a huge transformation.
Yeah.
And I remember you had your heart problems, and it was so interesting because it was literally your heart wasn't communicating properly.
It wasn't in sync.
It wasn't in sync.
It wasn't firing.
And your life was mirroring exactly that.
Yeah.
And so that hit up against such a different dynamic to where I was. I was kind of at the cusp of really bursting open in my business. And I remember being in this phase, being heavily pregnant and coming up against this conditioning that as a woman, I couldn't continue to thrive in my business whilst having babies. And so I remember you telling me you wanted to step out of that body of work permanently and follow your heart and start something new. And I remember thinking, okay, this is my chance. I love my work. This is my chance to change a conditioning that I have. So the dynamic in our partnership shifted. You had always been the one who was kind of the breadwinner, and I was, running my own, building my own business, and then that shifted. And I personally, I feel really proud of us for even allowing that and having that conversation, because I think that in itself can be a real wall to hit when it comes to men and women and comes to partnerships. So we were going through that and we made that shift. And then For me, my memory of it is that we just kept having the same fight over and over again. Different details, always about something different. But the dynamic and the fight and the pain just felt like it was the same fight.
Well, I also think, even though there was a transition, there was difficulties that we faced in that, in terms of taking on those different roles within the relationship and what impact that has as a man and as a woman, and our own unconscious expectations of ourselves and each other. Yeah. That certainly, and it wasn't clean. There was still there was certain expectation. It wasn't, you weren't fully comfortable with being the breadwinner. There was still a requirement or an expectation that I would still generate money. And
let's talk about this, because this is really, really interesting in itself. Yeah. How did it feel for you? How did it feel for you changing that dynamic? How did it feel for you, me becoming the breadwinner and you starting essentially from scratch? How did that feel on a deeper level? How did that feel for you?
Well, to be honest, I think it was difficult anyway, because changing the career that I'd loved for 25 plus years, which suddenly I realized it was actually quite caught up in my identity of who I was.
Yes.
And there was a lot of difficult feelings to go through in that alone, because I was quite invested in being the person who did this work.
Yes.
And I wasn't getting much satisfaction from that, and I had to really let go of that. So that was quite a personal process for me to deal with, and I think somehow I'm still dealing with that whole thing of identification with the work that you do.
Yes.
When that's taken away from you, or
So what was your identification with this particular kind of work? I mean, it was more corporate. It was 9 to 5.
Well, it was creative, actually.
It was creative. Yeah. It was it was the design world. Yeah. I mean, you were very good at it. You went to St. Martin's. You got a master's, scholarship, master's in design. You'd spent a long period of your life doing that. So when you say you were identified with that role, what was that identity?
Well, I think it was actually, the identity is based on having a certain degree of creative autonomy. Yes. And a certain creative authority. Yeah. Which I did, and a collaboration, a communication with people that I worked with. And for the bulk of my career, I worked as an independent consultant. I worked directly with clients. It was a direct relationship, but it wasn't, that role changed when we came into a family situation. I needed to go into a
9 to 5 job.
Well, into working for other people, and which changed the dynamic completely. I didn't quite have that same autonomy.
Yes.
And then for me, when I lose connection with that, I lose connection with the actual creative inspiration around that. And so there's less full expression, certainly less satisfying. It becomes much more about navigating that process.
So what I'm hearing, I mean, I kind of already knew this, but I'd forgotten, and hearing you speak, I really hear it, that actually this started years and years and years before. And I think a lot of people will relate to this, a lot of men will relate to this, is that point when you become a dad and you're responsible for a whole lot of other people, your wife, your baby, the house. And you went from living this very free, independent life, running your own business, to going into an office and working for other people. Yeah. Why? Because you were wanting to take care of us.
Yeah.
But in doing so, you went against your heart. Oof.
Yes, and I think it's an interesting topic, I think, for men and women, because it takes different forms. I think certainly there's an idea of sacrifice that both men and women have to do in terms of supporting the family. And often it's the case, I actually have new respect for the role of the partner, which is at home looking after the kids.
Yeah, because you've been doing that a lot in the last year.
Well, that's been, in a way, my primary role, certainly over the last couple of years at least. And it's a difficult position to take, because it's very demanding. It's sort of all-encompassing.
Yeah.
And then there's also a very strong need to be doing something in the world, I think.
Yeah.
and doing something which is an expression of who I am, independent of the family and the children.
Yes.
And that's particularly strong in men, I think. And I think that, this is something I do a lot of men's work. I work with men, and it's a very common thread. That's the importance of having the role, the responsibility as a husband and a father, but also how vital and almost what transcends that is having a real sense of purpose.
Yes.
That you actually, it may not be grand, it may not be a significant thing that you're working on, but it's certainly a sense that you're on a certain path or a certain journey which is congruent with who you are.
Yes. Yeah. And I guess what I hear now, and it's becoming apparent because we're sitting here together talking about both these roles, both, we could say it's the role of the man and the role of the woman, but that's not relevant anymore today. That can be swapped around many times. But the one that goes out to make the money and does so with the responsibility to care for the family, and then the one that stays at home. Now, what I'm hearing, and it is true, and I feel it, is that both human beings start to suppress authentic aspects of ourselves in order to do these things.
Or can do, yeah.
Well, it definitely felt that way.
Oh, okay, yes.
Like there is already a beginning of some suppression going on. You can't be your full, whole self. And I can't be my full, whole self because I got to be mom and I got to take care and and you can already hear that the problem's already beginning.
Well, to be honest, it stems from before that, from my part, and that's something I carried, in the fear that I carried from my experience of relationship in childhood and what I saw of my father. The path that he took, which was very much the profession he took and he invested in for 40 years of his life, was not the profession that he really wanted to do. But it was something he ended up in, almost by default, almost as like because he really wanted to be on the land and be a farmer, and that's what he relocated to New Zealand from the UK to do. And then he had a difficult experience early on. He was very young when he was doing that, and I think he got burnt really. But he retreated to an office job. He ended up being in an office job for 40 years, but really wasn't who he was.
Wow.
Yeah.
And he had a breakdown.
Yes, and that was a big, very formative experience in my life. He had a breakdown when I was about 11 or 12, purely because he was placed under pressure, a similar situation of being in a working situation, which he found too intense and he didn't respond well to.
Yes. And
created a lot of anxiety, and he ended up having a breakdown as a result.
Yes. So already it's kind of been set up. These are really deeply rooted. There's a story already deeply rooted. And from your perspective, it's the story of if I overwork, or if I give too much, or if I deny my heart, I will be burnt out. I'll have a breakdown.
Yeah, and there's some fear of that, taking on that responsibility of being the provider.
Yes.
Being the provider means I have to compromise myself and can't live a life of freedom.
Yes.
That's one of the stories.
Yes. And then on my side, what was so interesting was, I love my work. So it didn't feel like a sacrifice to step up and be the one to kind of get the opportunity to make that the priority. I mean, in fact, I thought it was a gift. I was so excited. But what started to happen was that 6-8 months down the line, or a year down the line, I started to get really resentful. And I started to feel really uncared for and unloved and unseen. And, at the time, that was all I could feel and see. And I thought it was you. And I was like, oh, I feel unseen by you. Years down the line, after having done an enormous amount of work on this, I can see that actually there was a story already there. My father left when I was 1. I didn't get his attention. I didn't get his love. That's not true. He loves me very much, but I didn't get his time or his attention. He moved out. I saw him once a week, and now I see him once a year maximum. Also, you know, he wasn't fatherly. He wasn't like a parent in my world. So I never experienced, so I was always kind of longing for that fatherly attention. And the way he would give it to me was he would give me money. And I would get checks in the post. Literally, I would get checks in the post, but I wouldn't get a phone call. So that pain was starting to play out for me. I was feeling abandoned by you, even though I had chosen to step up and be the one. And so, gosh, you can hear how many deep layers were starting to play out here. And how that manifested was we just started feeling, we just kept fighting all the time. We couldn't hear each other anymore. Like I've always felt, I write about it in the book. Like I would feel like my needs weren't being met. I would come to you wanting to get my needs met. You would feel controlled and trapped. And you would withdraw, and then I would feel abandoned. And like the whole thing, like it was the same thing that happened over and over and over and over again.
And for me, it started playing out a story which I also carried of really not being able to trust and not being able to really be safe in relationship. There's something about, and this is something which has been revealing itself the more I look at my own history around that. And of course, I think you'll probably talk about this, the relationship I had with my mum, and which I've been in sort of inquiry for a long time, but it's only recently been revealed that there was things that happened at some point when I was very young, probably 5 or 6, that had quite a formative impact on me. I think it was sort of like there was a punishment she did, which I think I always talked about it as a sort of story, which is sort of amusing, but I actually got a sense of the sort of cruelty of it, which I think put me on my guard ever since that point where I was on the lookout for being unjustly punished.
Unjustly punished by the woman.
Unjustly punished by the woman.
By the angry, disappointed woman.
By the angry, disappointed woman. And then, of course, that little story is quite a destructive one in a relationship. And it's also one which we'd both end up fighting against. So it's almost like a projection. I was bound to start mapping onto Nikki, as I have done on other women in my life, in my past.
Yes. And
then, you know, it starts playing out. And of course, it's something Nikki would fight against and be upset about carrying.
Yeah. And like no matter what I would try and get your attention, or I'd try and get you to hear me or to see me, and it would just kept manifesting more and more. You'd withdraw because it was like you were scared of the angry, disappointed woman.
And actually, for good reason. You know, there's quite a significant trauma response in me that, you know, having been punished like that, was really on the lookout. And so there's a real mix of fear and anger that would come up in me, which.
So you're always already expecting the lashing out from me,
the blame, and then the lashing out, and then the punishment. Yeah.
Which of course then led you to react in a certain way, which would then of course would trigger me so much, and I would then feel disappointed and angry and upset. And then I of course feel it was playing into the direct story of the abandonment around my father and also my mother. You know, I have always had this experience with my mum when I was little that I would be almost begging for her attention. And she would just pull away and pull away. So it was, we were literally playing out, identically playing out our childhood. Now, of course, at the time we couldn't see this, could we?
No.
We were just fighting.
But it was eating away at the reserves of the love and trust that we held for each other. That was the thing. It was almost like, you know, we're taking deposits out of that bank day after day, and to a point where there was nothing there, and we were really probably living in resentment with each other and really just trying to survive.
I mean, I speak about it in the book by the time I went to Peru, I booked the trip to Peru. I got offered this place on this retreat. I write about it in the book. In my experience, we were living under the same roof. We were parenting our children together, and we're good parents. They're beautiful children. But that was where it ended. For me, it felt like we were now living under the same roof, but separate lives. And we
weren't really meeting. I mean, we were still obviously really, we knew what was going on, but we weren't really meeting each other.
Well, I think what I'm saying is actually I realized that when I got to Peru, I had shut my heart down, that I was in resignation about us. And so I went and I did this ayahuasca, 2 weeks of ayahuasca, intense alignment retreat. And when I was there, I saw how much my own low self-worth was playing out in this dynamic, that I had gotten into a pattern that I was so anxious of the fight happening and the same trigger points happening over and over, that I was just suppressing more and more and more of myself and my needs, just to try and kind of keep it in survival. And of course, I can only speak for myself, but when I was doing this healing in the jungle, it just felt agony to continue that. I literally felt like I was repeating identically how I felt as a little girl in my childhood. I won't have this need because I won't have that need. And I can't be like this, and I can't be me here. It won't be loved and welcomed. So I'll have to just do whatever will be accepted. And so it was just so painful. So I came home and I realized that something had to change, and I didn't know how. So I came home and I brought it up. It was even the night I came back from Peru, I sat with you and I said, I can't remember the words, but this
can't go on or something.
I said, this can't go on.
Yeah.
Do you remember?
I do. I remember that. Yeah, it was a very difficult conversation and equally I was probably in a similar place of just feeling very misunderstood and really not. It was so difficult to be in that perpetual state of being in this sort of conflict, but also feeling very unaccepted for who I was. That's for sure what was going on for me.
Yes.
And really just trying to do my best in that situation, but a bit resigned as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
But also, it was quite strange you going back. That presented me looking after the kids to allow you, to support you to do that process, and then you came back and said, "Well, it's not working for me." So there was some anger initially.
Oh yeah, because you'd been looking after the kids for 2 weeks. You were so tired.
I was exhausted, and I felt like I'd been really being there in support for you, and it was a difficult thing to hear.
Yes.
And yet it was actually the best thing we could have been speaking about.
Well, we know that now.
We know that now. It was difficult at the time, and it led to us agreeing to have a separation. So we ended up having space apart.
Yeah, you moved out.
I moved out. I moved locally.
We managed to find somewhere a few doors down for you to live. I mean, our kids, Teo was 5, 6.
Yeah.
And Callum was a baby. Callum was 7 months.
Yeah. And that was very difficult because we both realized we had to just let everything go.
Yes.
Really. We didn't know what would be the outcome of it. And I think we confronted a lot in terms of what the natural course would be. Obviously when you hear about people separating, you think, well, that's only going to go one way.
Yes.
And we had to accept that might be the way that things were going to go. But we also went into it quite open-hearted, I think. We both sort of said, look, we don't know what's going to come from this, but this is what's needed. And I know I found it difficult at times, and it was difficult to negotiate, but it was also a really important period for me to reconnect with myself again.
Yes. Outside of the house, outside of the children.
To find my own space. And I was very much in the early stage. I think I was still training, doing my
you were
training with Animus. So I was very much in a position of transitioning into my new work. and really trying to find my feet with it. And I didn't have space to do that within the house. Weirdly, I hadn't found a way to do that, and that was revealed to be a big part of some of the conflict we had as well in terms of having our space at home.
Yes. Again, it comes back to the same thing. Yeah. And I'm bringing it up over and over again because I think I'm really seeing that this is a significant issue when it comes to the paradigm of relationships, the current paradigm, the one that we're coming out of, but the whole picture and conditioning of relationship that has been sold to us and taught to us requires the two human beings to somehow suppress themselves in some way to be able to allow the relationship to work. And on a long-term basis, that doesn't work. It kills your soul.
Yeah. Because
we're trying to fit into this picture of how it's meant to be, the pretty picture. We have to fit here, right? And so, even in the household, you're trying to follow your dreams, but you feel like there's no space, there's no room, there's no freedom to do that. I feel kind of moved talking about it because it's, now we're on the other side. I feel so that it's so painful to see, hear how suppressed you felt and how you didn't have that freedom. And I also felt the same. And it's like, wow, that's a painful place. That's a painful way to live.
And also I realized that some of those things, I didn't know what was important to me, and without going through this process, I didn't know some of the things which are not negotiable, and some of the things which, and that's part of my own issue in terms of looking at how I set boundaries, how I'm aware, this is something I never got taught. I never got asked when I was young, and I
asked what
I wanted. How do I feel? What do you need?
What do you want?
Yeah.
What do you need?
Yeah. I would withdraw. My technique would be to withdraw and to make my own world and to retreat into my creativity. That's why it was such a wrench to be taken away from that, or to have that whole environment sort of transform in a way.
Well, when you have two young children, that becomes impossible.
Yeah. And of course, that was something which you make compromises in terms of the use of the house, the space in the house. And we danced around the different rooms in our house, didn't we? Originally, what was my studio for a very short period of time became
Taya's
bedroom. And then, the small office, which was a replacement, then became a joint office, and then your office.
And eventually at your autonomous space, all of our autonomous space gets taken over by this thing called our life. And these two human beings inside of all of this is slowly kind of becoming more and more suppressed. Now, of course, we didn't know this at the time. We didn't see this. But when you moved out, the night you moved out, it literally felt like something had died. I remember I called my friend. I still get emotional about it. I couldn't breathe because it felt like I knew that whatever we had was gone. And it was like a death. And at the time, it really, really felt like a death. And I really didn't know whether that was permanent. That was it. That was over. But I knew that whatever we had ever perceived as us and our life and the way it was, I knew that was over.
Yeah.
Oh, and it was like it was like leaping off a cliff without knowing if there was even anywhere to land.
I have to say, it's really interesting when you go through that, because there's a lot of pressure on relationship, and that almost released, as much as something died, something released the pressure as well.
To try and save something.
Yeah, giving up the pressure of saving something, but also opening up a possibility of something else to emerge. There was, and we were very lucky in that the situation, the support of people, friends of ours, who actually had a place which I could stay in close by.
Yes, thank you, Wayne and Georgia, who let us have your place.
But who actually were extremely supportive in a way which wasn't about taking sides or drawing conclusions or giving advice. And we were talking about this the other day, weren't we? Like, we're so grateful that we weren't given advice, and we weren't invested in trying to find an answer. Yes. Either of us. Yes. There was plenty of emotions swirling around for both of us, plenty of anger and frustration and disappointment, all those things.
We were pretty angry at each other at the beginning.
Yeah, and I find, I just reflect on that I think often that's what happens, even just unconsciously we think, separation, we know who's at fault or who's to blame, or we're looking for someone to blame.
Yes.
We're looking for the reasons.
Yes.
And actually it's the separate entity which is probably most likely to be the issue. It's the relationship which is forged between us.
The dynamic
that we are suddenly falling prey to.
Yes. So let's talk about that, because this is really, really valuable.
Yeah.
I mean, it's blown my mind. It's changed my life to know this, to have learned this. And I can say hands down, 100%, when you moved out, I was ready for divorce. Like, it was done. I was over. I was out of there. I was already thinking, I'm going to find someone better. This time I'll do it good. This time I'll do it better. I'm shocked. I'm still shocked as to what I discovered 5 months, 6 months down the line. Like, we went to therapy every week for this, for 6 months, living separately. We met every week for therapy. Why? Why did we do that? Well, because we have children together. And I have to say, I was pretty resistant. I was like, why do I have to invest time in this? It's done for me. But our therapist was like, well, you have children together. You're going to have to bring them up. So together. So, it's worthwhile you being able to find some kind of healing, conscious, whole way to be together. And 6 months down the line, I discover something I just couldn't see before. It was like I was completely blind to it, and then it just suddenly became clear. I remember a moment in therapy when I suddenly realized that I had chosen perfectly. Like, everything that I thought was the problem in the relationship was actually what I had unconsciously chosen. Why? Because my experience of intimacy, the experience that I had with the problems in our relationship, was a direct mirror to how I felt as a little girl with my mum. I mean, it wasn't even close. It was identical. My needs can't be met. I'm not seen. I'm going to be abandoned. Keeps pulling away, like literally identical. How about for you?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I've seen this a lot in my life in different areas as well, but it certainly was like, even though I'm living in my worst nightmare, it's exactly what I anticipate.
Or even that you're used to.
I expect, yeah.
Or even that you choose. That's the thing. It's like neither of us had a blueprint for anything other than what was actually happening. And that felt normal to me. I remember actually asking, how would I even allow deeper intimacy in? And at the time, I think I wouldn't have. I would have rejected it completely.
Yeah, and absolutely the same for me. I think it's something where it appears like the other person is to blame, and that's what consolidates and crystallizes. And yet, as you explore, and as I explored myself, I realized it's unearthing my own relationship to those things, and the history of those things, and also,
yes,
and a certain degree of powerlessness against it. Once you have the dynamic up and running,
it's mechanical.
It takes on its own mechanism.
Yes,
and, momentum.
And it almost gets stronger the more you try and fight against it.
Yeah.
It's like it gets more intense.
And it's quite surreal. I think we end up in this a lot, where we're sort of in a relationship when we don't see the other person and they don't see us. And we're constantly in a fight against these projections of each other, aren't we? We're sort of like, we're living with and we've had a mutual teacher talk about this. In a relationship, there's actually 4 people. There's the 2 people, and then there's
the 2 stories.
Each other's projections of each other.
Yes.
And that's who you end up in a relationship with. But
yes, the relationship itself actually ends up being the 2 projections.
The 2 projections.
And then the 2 human beings underneath are kind of fighting for some space or for some autonomy. And
frustrated
exactly.
not being visible. Yeah.
So 6 months into our separation, we had done enough work now to see this entity that was playing out. The relationship itself is its own entity. And I want to say that we focus so much in our lives on he did this, she did this, he did this, she did this. If he changes this and if she changes this, but it's not separate. Like the relationship itself is its own entity. As I would be triggered by the exact experience I was having with my mother in my childhood, simultaneously you would be triggered by the exact experience and the fear around your childhood and your mother. And it was happening literally like a dance in union. And only until we started to really see it, bring it into consciousness, did we start having any real breakthroughs. And they surprised me, these breakthroughs. I was ready. I thought we were done. And then suddenly this love just started to come through.
And I think that's interesting, because I think we talked about this, the gift. I mean, it was almost like, because we had two kids and 2 beautiful kids we both love, that was a reason for us to really commit and invest in it and exploring this.
Yes.
And it was also, quite feasibly, if we didn't have those kids, it would have been difficult for us to stay together and go through this. And I think that's what people face when they don't have children.
Yes.
So,
well, I think that's the issue, isn't it? Is that what we don't get taught is that the relationship itself has its own dynamic, and it is a mirror to your relationship with your mother, which is the first relationship with intimacy. And so when the in love phase starts wearing off, and the beautiful picture and the romance and all that the hormone stuff starts wearing off, what you're left with, and everybody, this is universal, is faced with is their own experience of intimacy. But we blame it on the other person, when actually I had abandonment and emptiness inside of me already that was entangled with intimacy. That was how I learned about intimacy. Intimacy equals abandonment and emptiness.
My equation, intimacy, is basically living in fear of punishment and deep wounding.
deep wounding. Well, you're laughing about it now. It's not funny at the time, but there's an entanglement, and the entanglement is not by anything you're doing. It's inside of me, and it's inside of you. And until that is brought into consciousness, the dynamic just keeps playing out.
Well, also there's nothing we can do about it. We're actually powerless to that. We're going to attract, we talk about making conscious choice. We're making a choice, which at the time seems to be, I'm going to have not that, but inevitably we end up as the surface layer disappears.
It's a magnet.
What's revealed is the core unconscious attraction.
And why is that? Like why is that? Why do we get magnetically pulled towards human beings that have the identical mirror to your core relationship to intimacy? Why? Now, what we've started to discover on this side of the journey, and we're like a year and a half down now. We got remarried after 6 months of separation. We discovered love, And it was a different kind of love, wasn't it? I remember when it started happening, it was so spacious.
Well, I'd also say there was, because we had a ceremony, a recommitment.
Yeah, we renewed our vows.
We renewed our vows, but we made new vows, and we did so from a very different place. You know, we'd sort of come into a different place, and we saw, personally for me, I guess I saw a different context for that experience. Was very much about setting an intention and setting a foundation of a real agreement of partnership, not as something that we're working towards, but as it's something that was a default.
Yes. And
that changes everything, because that to me is it prepares the ground for love. We've talked about this, of living in the paradigm of love, or creating ground for love to emerge, rather than being in love with each other and in this sort of romantic love. It's much more making a commitment to live in the field of love.
Yes. And love becomes available.
Yeah.
Well, because we are already love. And when you clear enough away expectation, pictures, conditioning, judgments, story, what becomes available is love, is in the field of love. And I have a significant moment that changed my life, and I think it had a really big impact on us. And I write about it in the book. It's got its own chapter under truth telling the truth. There was a point just as we were having the breakthrough, and I think it might have been the reason of the breakthrough, when we started just telling each other the absolute truth. And I remember telling you everything that I had been feeling that I'd never thought I was allowed to even feel or even think. You know, like I remember saying I don't think conventional marriage is for me. I'm questioning, I need a lot of space. I'm not sure whether I want to share bedrooms all the time. Like saying things that my mind had told me, I'm not allowed to think these things. It doesn't fit in the picture that I've been taught. And I remember you doing the same. And I remember you meeting me. You heard me, and then you shared, and I heard you, and there was like a freedom that started being allowed. For me, that was a significant moment. I remember feeling the first time I was like, wow, I really saw a possibility there. You mean we can be together and be our full, whole selves? You mean that's allowed?
Yeah, my attention on it is related to that, but I think for me it was, and it's a journey I've been on, is learning to understand what I want, and then learning to be able to ask for it without the fear of it being turned down.
Yes.
Because that's a big journey, or big learning for me, because there's always something in me carries an expectation that I won't be able to have what I want, and I don't even know how to ask for it.
And when you do come to me now, because you're getting better at it, I want to give you what you want. I want to take care of your needs. So it's a joy when you come and do that. And so it's healing for me, for both of us when that happens.
Well, I realize that this is a very key thing in terms of polarity as well. I think I realize if I'm holding you as the one that's giving permission, you then become the mother of the household.
Oh, I hate that. I hate that.
Yeah.
I don't want to be that role.
And it's like kryptonite for relationship.
Yeah, and then you're resentful at me, and it's kryptonite for intimacy, of course.
Yeah. So she certainly doesn't want to take that role in the house or the home, or certainly not the relationship. And
yes.
And I get doubly resentful because I feel like that little boy that's looking for permission or seeking permission.
Yes.
And then being told no. So it's
yes. And I think so where, just to kind of wrap up this one episode, what I'm hearing is that we have about 100 episodes that we could talk about, and we probably will. Where we are now, for me, it just feels like this is continued. But the context in which we're coming from, has allowed so much more spaciousness and freedom.
And I think maybe the big learning from this is that we see now in what occurs in the world, how relationship is talked about, that the sense that these crises that we come into in a relationship are really turning points. And there could be times where it means that a relationship has come to an end.
That's a healthy choice. Sometimes it is the end. Why? Because maybe it's toxic or violent or extremely damaging. Like then I think it is a loving choice to walk away. But I genuinely believe if two human beings are willing to go deeper for themselves and for each other, I really believe these crisis points are enormous invitations for transformation.
And speaking of what you've been talking about the last few days around how crucial it is that is at a point to actually share the whole truth.
That's the point, to tell the truth. Yes.
As an offering to your partner.
Yes.
To really share what's going on for you.
Yes.
And to also give them the opportunity to respond. Because what at the moment, at that time, the risk of relationship we all face is that either of you can walk away at any time.
Yes.
Which should actually be the agreement, really.
That's happening all the time.
That's happening all the time.
It should be that free. We shouldn't feel like this is a ball and chain. This should be a daily choice. Like, I'm still here. I want to be here. I want to show up here. Not I'm trapped here. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's definitely the point when you can actually have those conversations and go,
yes,
this is not working for me for these reasons.
Yes.
And this is who I am.
And it is a risk. You have to risk. You see, you can't try and survive and also allow something authentic and healing to come through. You have to let go of the survival of the relationship. You have to let go of the survival of the picture in order to tell the truth and allow for something to come through. You have to let go of the survival. And in telling the truth, if I tell the truth, that gives me the opportunity to show up in my worth and integrity, and it gives you the opportunity to hear the truth and to meet me if you choose to, and vice versa. You see, what normally happens is that's the point where someone has an affair or picks a fight so bad that you can't hear each other anymore and it's over. Or something, you get distracted by something, and there's some other reason. But the opportunity is like, can we allow ourselves as human beings to be so honest about our humanness?
Well, actually, also what usually happens is that person, the projection that you hold of the other person is sort of set in stone. And you see no possibility. You've lost sight of the person that lies underneath.
Yes.
So
give them the opportunity to show up in another way.
Yeah.
Yes. This has been good. Thanks, Kev.
Thanks, Nikki.
It's been really lovely having you here, darling. Thank you. And I just want to say, I say this to you. I've said this to you so many times, and I write about it in the book. I'm so grateful that it was you, and that you stayed with the process and you showed up, because not everybody does that. And I'm so grateful for what we have now. I've discovered a love and an intimacy with you on this side of the journey that I did not know was possible. And it only gets deeper. Like, we're going to be old and gray and it's going to get deeper. We're already old and grey. You're old and grey. I love you.
I'm very grateful too. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Thank you so much. So I hope you guys found that useful. We're bound to record more. We've clearly got a lot to talk about.
There's a few more bullet points.
But thank you, Kev. Thank you so much.